Montana Territory, January 1883. The snow fell like a death shroud over the Bitterroot Mountains when Fletcher Grady spotted the figure crumpled near the edge of his property. Half buried in drifts, barely moving. He jerked his horse to a halt, heart slamming against his ribs. "God Almighty," he muttered, dismounting fast, boots cracking through the ice crust. It was a woman. Her skin was waxy blue, lips split from cold, eyes barely open. Her coat was torn, the hem stiff with frost, and her gloveless hands looked black around the fingertips. "Miss!" He knelt beside her, tugging off his thick buffalo hide gloves and pressing 2 fingers to her throat. A beat, faint but there, still alive. Her cracked lips parted. Fire, she rasped, barely more than a breath. "You will have one," he said, already scooping her into his arms. She weighed next to nothing. "You hold on. You hear me?" The wind howled as he carried her to his horse, wrapping her tight against his chest, tucking his coat around her. She did not fight it, just shivered, her head slumping against his shoulder. He rode hard, faster than he ever had in winter, hoofs pounding over crusted snow back toward the small ranch he had worked with bleeding hands for the past 6 years. It was a lonely place, tucked against the tree line, with a cabin he had built himself after burying too many hopes in the dirt alongside his father's grave. Inside, he lit the fire high and fast, dragging the cot close to the hearth. He stripped off her frozen boots, cringing at the state of her feet, red, raw, and frostbitten. He worked quickly, gently, using warm cloths, not hot water, warming her slowly the way Doc Holloway had taught him years back. She moaned but did not wake. By morning, her cheeks had a little color again. She was still breathing. Fletcher sat beside her, a mug of coffee cooling in his hands, eyes never leaving her. He had no idea who she was or how she ended up out there. But she was alive, and he was going to keep her that way. She stirred days later. Eyes fluttered open pale green, startling under the soot-colored bruises of cold. "What happened?" Her voice cracked, dry as bone. "You were half dead in the snow," he said, leaning forward. "I found you just past the ridge. Name's Fletcher Grady. You are safe now." She blinked slowly, trying to lift her hand before letting it fall. Adeline Garner." Fletcher nodded. "You are lucky to be alive, Adeline." She turned her face away, jaw tight. "I am not sure I am." He did not ask what she meant. Not yet. She looked like she had lost too much already. Over the next week, Adeline grew stronger. She winced through the pain of her healing feet, but she walked slowly. She helped peel potatoes, folded linens, sat close to the fire without speaking much. Fletcher did not press her, but he noticed things. The way she flinched at loud noises. How her eyes darted toward the door when the wind picked up. She was running from something, from someone. One evening, as snow dusted the windows and the stew simmered on the stove, she finally said it. "I was supposed to marry a man in Butte. He wrote sweet letters, promised a kind home. I left Ohio to come west." Her hands twisted in her lap. "He was not who he claimed. He locked me in a root cellar after I arrived. Said I was his now, that no one would come looking." Fletcher's stomach turned. "How did you get away?" "I waited until he passed out drunk. Took his coat. Ran east with nothing but snow and fear behind me." He stood, walked to the fire, added another log. The flames leapt higher. "You are safe here," he said. "I mean that." She looked up at him. "Why would you help me? I could be trouble." He met her eyes, steady and warm. "You were freezing to death in my snow. Trouble or not, I was not going to let you die." A long silence fell between them, but it was not uncomfortable. It was the kind that made the air feel thick with something unspoken. That night, Fletcher stayed up, listening to the wind, watching the fire. He had not shared his home with anyone in years. And never a woman like her, so quiet, so strong beneath the hurt. By late February, the snow began to melt. Adeline stood taller, walked farther, her cheeks fuller with each passing day. She started cooking meals, mending his shirts, humming low old tunes while she worked. Fletcher found himself lingering near her just to hear her voice. One morning, she really laughed when one of his calves escaped the pen and he had to chase it through the mud. The sound stopped him cold. She had not laughed since she arrived. He looked back at her, grinning through the mess. Her eyes met his, bright in the pale sun. Something shifted then. That night, they ate by firelight. She passed him the bread she had baked, their hands brushed, and neither pulled back. "I never thought I would feel safe again," she whispered. He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "You are safe, Adeline." "As long as I am breathing." Her eyes filled, and she did not look away. By March, the snow was nearly gone. The hills turned brown and green. Fletcher built her a new set of boots, softer on the toes, better for walking. She kissed his cheek when he gave them to her. "I do not have much," he said, voice low. "Just this ranch, a few horses, some land not worth much to anyone but me." She stepped closer, her hand on his chest. "I do not want much, just a place I can belong." "You belong here," he said, voice rough. "With me." She leaned in, pressed her lips to his. It was not rushed. It was not desperate. It was steady, like everything between them had been. And it felt right. Fletcher pulled her into his arms, holding her close as the fire flickered behind them. He had offered her warmth when she was half dead. Now she gave it back to him in full. "I think I'm falling in love with you," she whispered. "You already have," he said, resting his forehead against hers. "And I love you right back." They stood like that for a long while, wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had known too much cold finally finding their fire. The first rain came in mid-April, thin and cold, washing the last of the snow from the gullies and softening the hard edges of winter. Fletcher stood on the porch, one hand braced against the post, watching Adeline kneel in the muddy garden bed where she'd coaxed green shoots from thawed earth. She didn't notice him at first, strands of her hair clinging to her damp cheeks as she pushed soil around the roots of some turnips she'd bartered for from the Coopers down the valley. He crossed the yard, boots quiet in the wet dirt. "You don't have to be out here in the rain." She didn't look up. "Nothing grows if you wait for clear skies." He crouched beside her. "You always garden?" "In Ohio, I used to help my grandmother. She had hands like tree roots and a temper to match, but she could grow anything." Adeline sat back on her heels and wiped her hands on her apron. "She used to say the ground remembers who's good to it." Fletcher nodded, glancing at the dark soil. "You think this land remembers?" "I don't know." Her voice was quiet. "But I think it knows when someone's trying." The chickens clucked near the coop, pecking at wet straw. Fletcher glanced toward the barn. "You feel up to a ride tomorrow?" "I need to check the north fence. Some of it washed out." Adeline looked at him then, brushing a streak of dirt from her cheek. "If you've got a horse gentle enough not to throw me, I'm willing." He smiled, just a little. "I've got a gelding named Patter who's lazier than a Sunday preacher. He'll do." The next morning broke with a hush, the kind that came after rain mist curling low along the hills, sky pale and wide. Fletcher saddled Patter for Adeline and took his roan, leading them up the ridge where the fence ran along the edge of a swale. The wire had sagged in two places, one post knocked clean over, probably by runoff. He dismounted and began resetting the post while Adeline held the wire taut. She grunted softly as she leaned her weight back. "You ever think about leaving this place?" Fletcher paused, dirt on his hands, the cedar post weighty beneath his grip. "No, not ever. Had my fill of moving when I was a boy. My ma died in Nebraska, my pa in Idaho. Nothing good ever came from setting out again." Adeline adjusted her grip. "I used to think if I just kept moving, I'd outrun the parts of me I didn't like. Turns out they follow just fine." He drove the post into the damp soil and straightened. "You're not the same woman who came crawling through my snow." She met his eyes, not blinking. "I'm still her, but I'm also someone who doesn't wake up afraid anymore." They rode home slow, letting the horses pick their way through the softened trail. As they reached the edge of the clearing, Fletcher pulled his horse up short. "There's something I want to show you." He led her behind the barn, where a small structure stood half-finished, 2 walls upright, rafters bare to the sky. I started building this the year after I buried Pa, meant it for a tack shed, but never finished. Adeline ran her hand along the rough beam. Why show me now? I thought maybe it could be something else. If you wanted. She looked at him, her brow furrowing. Like what? He shifted, suddenly unsure. A place with more light. More space. A home, not just shelter. She stepped close, fingers still on the beam. You're asking me to stay. I'm asking if you want to build something here. With me. Adeline's eyes didn't waver. I don't have a dowry. I don't have family to speak for me. Just hands that know how to work and a heart that's learning how to trust again. Fletcher reached out, brushing her knuckles with his. That's all I want. She leaned her forehead to his chest, quiet for a long moment. Then, yes, I'll build with you. They stood together beneath the open rafters, mist drifting through the wood-like breath. Around them, the land was beginning again. And so were they. By late May, the cottonwoods along the creek had leafed out in pale green, and the valley lay quiet beneath a sky stretched wide with promise. Fletcher rose early each morning, just after the rooster's call, and found Adeline already up, her sleeves rolled, hair twisted away from her face with a strip of buckskin. She moved through the kitchen like she'd always belonged there, measuring flour by feel, not weight, and humming to herself songs he didn't know. They took to working side by side without needing to speak much. She stitched curtains for the new walls, he cut lumber from the old pine stand past the ridge. One evening, as the light slanted long through the cabin windows, she turned to him while folding a length of fabric. Did your father teach you carpentry? Fletcher shook his head. He believed in hard work, but not finesse. I learned from a Swedish fellow who passed through for a season. Could build a dovetail joint faster than most men could blink. Adeline smiled faintly. That's why the beams don't creak. I noticed. He looked up from the tools he was oiling. You always notice what others miss? Only when I care who built it. That quiet acknowledgement hung between them, heavier than any praise. He didn't answer, just stood and walked to her, resting his palm lightly against her back. Her breath caught, but she didn't pull away. The next Sunday, they rode south toward the river bend where Fletcher's boundary met the old trapper trail. The ride wasn't for work. He had packed bread, hard cheese, and dried pears in a small sack, and Adeline had brought a wool blanket. They spread it beneath a twisted juniper, the river glinting nearby, swollen from melt. She leaned back against the sloped roots, her skirt tucked beneath her knees. I used to imagine what a husband might be like, she said, voice low. But I never pictured someone who'd patch fences beside me or bring me fresh kindling without asking. I never pictured wanting someone to stay, Fletcher said. But now I can't imagine this place without your boots by the door. She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. I don't want to be something passing. Not again. You're not, he said without hesitation. You're the only thing I want to keep. They didn't return until dusk, the horses picking their way through the quiet woods. That night, as they lay beside each other in the bed they now shared, Adeline turned toward him, her fingers trailing a slow path along his collarbone. There's a part of me I haven't told you about, she said. He looked at her, waiting. I used to draw. Ink and charcoal mostly. I stopped after Ohio. After everything. You miss it. Some nights I wake up thinking about the smell of chalk dust. About how lines on paper made me feel steadier. Fletcher sat up, swung his legs over the edge of the bed. Come with me. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and followed him to the trunk at the foot of the stairs. He dug through old ledgers and weathered maps until he found a leather-bound folio, the pages yellowed but unused. My mother's brother sent this to me one winter. Said it was too fine for a rancher. I never used it. Adeline took it slowly, reverently. It's beautiful. It's yours. She opened to the first page, fingertips pausing at the clean surface. I don't know if I remember how. You will, he said. Your hands remember things even when your mind forgets. She didn't speak, but when she looked at him, her eyes shone with something fierce and quiet. By June, her drawings hung on the new walls, sketches of the valley, of Fletcher splitting wood, of the mule deer that wandered close to the edge of the pasture. They didn't talk about what the drawings meant. They didn't have to. One morning, as they watered the vegetable rows, Adeline straightened suddenly, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "There's a rider coming," she said. Fletcher wiped his hands on his trousers and moved to her side. A lone figure crested the far hill, slow-moving, not urgent. As the rider drew closer, Fletcher's jaw tightened. "Do you know him?" Adeline asked. "Sheriff Langley. Only comes out this far if something's wrong." Langley dismounted slowly, tipping his hat and wiping his brow with a kerchief. "Morning, Grady. Miss Garner." Adeline's back stiffened. Langley looked between them, hesitant. "There's been word from Butte. That fella you ran from, Miss Garner, he was found dead. Knife to the gut. No one saw who did it." Adeline's breath caught. "You think I?" Langley held up a hand. "Don't think anything. Just thought you should know. You're not being pursued. Not anymore." Fletcher stepped forward. "She's not going anywhere." Langley nodded, his gaze lingering on the new structure rising behind the house. "Don't look like she needs to." After the sheriff rode off, Adeline stood silent for a long moment. Then she turned to Fletcher. "I thought I feel relief. But I don't know what I feel. You don't owe that man anything. Not even your anger. I don't want to carry his shadow anymore." "Then don't," Fletcher said. "Let it fall behind you." She reached for his hand and pressed it to her chest. "I want to build a life here. No ghosts. Just us." He kissed her temple, steady and sure. "Then that's what we'll do." And with summer thickening over the valley, they turned back toward the half-built walls that would soon hold everything they were becoming. The porch roof went up in early July, nailed down under a sky hard with heat. Fletcher wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his wrist, squinting toward the hills where the grass had already turned brittle gold. Adeline was inside, fitting shelves into the new pantry they'd built just off the kitchen. Her shoulders had tanned from days in the sun, and her hands no longer trembled when she held a hammer. He came in just before noon, the scent of sage rising off his clothes. She looked up from the cedar planks she was sanding, her braid falling forward over her shoulder. "You've got sawdust in your lashes." He blinked. "That what's making everything look soft?" She leaned in and brushed his cheek with her thumb. "I think that's just your eyes." He caught her hand gently. "You ever think you'd end up here?" "Not once." She drew back, setting the sandpaper aside. "But I don't miss where I was headed." He leaned against the doorframe. "You think you'll want to marry here?" Adeline looked at him directly, no hesitation. "I'd marry you in a field of thistle if that's what we had. I've got better than thistle. There's a glade west of the creek. Wildflowers came in late this year. I thought, maybe there." Her face shifted, quiet and certain. "That sounds like a place where things start instead of end." They set a date without ceremony, choosing the second Sunday of August. Fletcher rode into town 2 days later to speak with Reverend Sloane, who agreed to ride out for the service. He returned with muslin for Adeline's dress and a tin of barley candy she didn't ask for but didn't stop smiling about when he handed it to her. They invited no one but the Coopers, who had lent them seed potatoes in the spring, and old Elsie Byrne, who still carved spoons from driftwood and had once delivered Fletcher during a February storm when the doctor's wagon got stuck in the flats. Adeline made her gown from the muslin, sewing in the late evenings by lantern light. Fletcher watched her sometimes from the doorway as she pinned and hemmed with slow, precise fingers. On the final night before the wedding, she set the dress aside and padded out to the porch, barefoot, her face lit only by the moon. "You nervous?" he asked, pulling a blanket around her shoulders. "No," she rested her head against his arm. "I think when something's been earned, it doesn't feel like a risk." He nodded. "You earned this." "So did you." The morning of the wedding, the glade shimmered in yellow and violet, bees humming low through the tall stalks. Fletcher wore his best shirt, the one with the brass buttons he hadn't fastened since his father's funeral. Adeline came down the slope on Elsie's arm, her dress simple, her face bare, her eyes locked on his. Reverend Sloane kept the ceremony short. No one wept. No one shouted. But when Fletcher took Adeline's hands, there was a hush so thick the birds seemed to pause their calls. "I don't have anything but what I've built with these hands," he said, voice low, "and I want to build the rest of it with you." Adeline smiled, steady and clear. "Then I'll be yours." with both feet planted and both hands open. They kissed once. Only once. But it was enough to anchor the moment. That night, after the others had gone and the stars flickered bright over the ridge, they lay in the new room of the house with the windows open to the warm dark. "I used to think love was something you had to chase," she murmured. Fletcher turned toward her, his hand resting lightly at her waist. "And now I know it's something you build. Nail by nail. Hour by hour." He kissed her shoulder, slow and quiet. "Then we'll keep building." Outside, the wind brushed through the grass like a whisper, and inside, the two of them lay wrapped in something earned and lasting. Nothing hurried, nothing borrowed. Just the peace of belonging finally found. The last of summer passed in a hush of crickets and warm pine-scented evenings. The new house settled into itself, boards tightening in the heat, shutters creaking gently in the afternoon wind. Adeline stood at the water barrel one morning, sleeves pushed high as she rinsed the flour from her arms. Fletcher was mending the bridle straps beneath the porch awning, his back to her, quiet apart from the steady pull of his hands. "You ever think about children?" she asked, not turning. He didn't hesitate. "Sometimes." She dipped her arms again. The water cooled from the night air. "I never thought I'd live long enough to raise any." He set the leather down. "You think you'd want them here? With me? I think I'd want them to grow up with the sound of horses and the smell of bread baking and someone who looks them in the eye when they speak." He crossed to her then, drying her arms with the edge of his shirt. "Then that's what they'll have." By late August, Fletcher had cleared the overgrown path behind the barn that led to the old root cellar. He planned to turn it into a smokehouse before winter. Adeline came out with lemonade one afternoon and found him sitting on the edge of the stone steps, staring down into the dim space below. She handed him the cup and he drank before speaking. "There's a lot I buried out here. Not just tools and seed. Memories too. Things I didn't want to carry." She sat beside him on the rough stone. "You don't have to explain. I want to." He rubbed his hands along his knees. "Before you, I never spoke out loud about what happened after Pa died. I stayed shut up in that cabin 2 winters straight. Ate nothing but salt pork and hard biscuit. Didn't talk to a soul." She touched his hand lightly. "I know what it means to go quiet. I lived in my own silence for years." He looked at her then, and something in his eyes settled. "You pulled me back. You steadied me." They cleared the cellar together, stacking the old jars and sweeping out the dust. Fletcher hung a new door on its frame, and Adeline lined the walls with muslin bags of dried sage and thyme. What had once been a place of storage became something useful again. In early September, Fletcher brought home a milk cow from a neighbor whose wife had taken ill and needed help with the harvest. The cow was ornery and stubborn, but Adeline spoke to her in low tones and won her over with apple peelings and patience. "She's yours now," Fletcher said one morning, watching the two of them through the slats of the barn. "I think she knows it," Adeline replied, brushing straw from her skirt. They named the cow Ruth after Adeline's grandmother, who had taught her how to tell weather by the smell of the wind. By harvest, the corn stood shoulder high and the potatoes came up fat and clean. Adeline preserved tomatoes in heavy jars and Fletcher stacked kindling beneath the porch in neat rows. They worked long hours, but it wasn't the kind of labor that wore a person down. It was the kind that built something lasting. One Sunday, they walked to the ridge after supper, the sky painted in streaks of orange and gold. Adeline carried a small bundle in her hand wrapped in cloth. "I've been saving this," she said, untying the corners to reveal a charcoal drawing. It was the house, mid-build, with Fletcher standing at the frame, hammer in hand. He traced the lines with his thumb. "When did you make this?" "Back in May. I never showed you because it wasn't finished." "It is now." She folded the cloth back over it. "I want our children to see what we built. Not just the walls, but the beginning of it. What it looked like before it was home." He nodded, and they stood there until the sun dipped below the far hills. That night, she curled close to him beneath the quilt, her hand resting over his heart. "I think I'm with child." He didn't say anything right away. Just held her closer. "You're sure?" he asked quietly. "I've been late before, but not like this. And I feel different. Not sick, just full in a new way." He kissed her hair. "Then we'll make room." They rose early the next morning and walked to the orchard at the edge of their land. The apples were just beginning to ripen, small and tart, but full of promise. Fletcher picked one and handed it to her, and she bit into it, laughing at the sharpness. "We'll need a cradle," she said. "I'll carve one," he said, already picturing the shape in his mind. "From pine so it smells sweet." As the season turned, they prepared quietly. Fletcher added a second shelf to the bedroom for swaddling cloths and dried herbs. Adeline sewed small shirts from worn linen, her belly rounding soft beneath her apron. They didn't speak much of what was coming, but they moved with a shared rhythm, shaping the days around the life they were making. The first frost came late, and with it the child. A boy, born in the hush of early morning, his cry high and strong. Fletcher held him with hands steadier than he expected, and Adeline watched with eyes full of firelight and tears. "He's got your eyes," she whispered. "No," Fletcher said, brushing the boy's cheek. "He's got yours, the kind that see everything." They named him Elias, after no one, because he was the beginning of a new line. That winter, they lived close to the hearth, 3 bodies wrapped in warmth and the quiet miracle of belonging. Fletcher carved toys from applewood, and Adeline sang lullabies she hadn't remembered until now. Snow fell deep, but the house held firm, and the world outside seemed smaller, safer. One night, as the baby slept in his cradle beside the bed, Adeline reached for Fletcher's hand. "Do you ever miss what came before?" He shook his head. "I don't look back anymore. Everything I need is here." She touched his face, her fingers warm. "I never believed love could feel like this. Steady, rooted." He kissed her softly. "It's the only kind I ever wanted." And as the wind curled around the eaves and the fire burned low, Fletcher and Adeline lay together in the home they had made, their child safe beside them, the past left behind like old snow. What they had built would last, not because it was easy, but because it had been made with care, with truth, and with the quiet, steadfast kind of love that holds through every storm.